everyone, and welcome back to Crafters Grove. Today I'm going to be walking you through our door to window conversion. So as you can see here, we have a lot of doors in this house. It's very strange. We don't quite know the history, but older houses tend to have these little eccentricities that make them unique, but also make it a little less functional. So you can see these two doors faced each other. It almost looks like the Matrix had a little blip, but it wasn't working for us. You know, there was these tiny windows in this old door, plus the screen door. It didn't allow a lot of light through, plus you couldn't really see much through it. And in addition to that, all of these old doors are not good for the environment. They're not efficient. They let a lot of light through the cracks, which means there's wind coming through, air coming through, snow coming through, you name it. So we needed to replace them. And because we don't need two doors kitty corner to each other, we decided to put in a window, and we're really happy with this change. So we wanted to provide you a little bit of information of how we did that. So if you want to do this, you can too. So the first thing you want to do is remove that door, and bam, here you go. Okay, just kidding. We need to backtrack a little bit. So you take off the door. You want to carefully remove all of the woodwork around the door, all of that trim, because when you have a window company coming in, they're going to do their best to be careful, but honestly, it's best to remove it, and you need to cut it anyways to fit the new window. As you can see here, the trim isn't going to go all the way to the ground. That would look kind of strange. There are some workarounds, but we wanted this final product. So once you remove this decorative frame from the wall, you're going to discover some more decorative but also useful wood that sits just beside the door hinges. You can see that here in this other photo from a different video from Stephen and I. And this is wood that sits up against the actual door frame that provides structural support, to which the door attaches to. You're going to want to remove that as well so you can get right down to the studs. Or in other words, the supporting frame that you see here in this photo, indicated by the pink arrows. So once you're down to the studs, you're ready for the next steps, and I'm going to talk about those using this diagram. So the door opening is represented by the blue, and then the white line is the floor line. So there's actually a little bit of a step up, as most doors do have, and that's represented by this black line now that I filled in. Next, you want to proceed with framing. Before you do that, you want to decide how big this window is going to be. We just went with the largest window we could have, given the width of this space and what the window company that we were working with could provide. As you get into custom windows, there's quite a variety of options you could have out there, and you could also go beyond this frame, but then it's going to get a little bit more complex, a little bit more expensive. So to build the framing to accommodate our window size, we put our first 2x4 horizontal a foot off the ground. Then we added two 2x4 pieces vertical underneath that initial 2x4 to provide that support for the frame. We place those at 16-inch intervals starting from the left side based on standard framing spacing. Next, you're going to want to add some insulation into that frame. Then if you are having a window company install your window, you're likely going to have some time between when you've completed this framing job to when the window comes in. So you want to make sure to close up this opening. What we did was use some scraps of wood that we had, like plywood lying around from old jobs, and covered up the space here on the inside, and then we had a full board to go around the outside, which you can kind of get a little bit of a sense of in our old family video footage here. That board was good to help keep out people and critters, although we did have an instance where some bees made their way into our home while they were swarming in order to try to find a new location for their new hive. Maybe I'll add that in as some bonus footage at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so when it was time to install the window, we just removed the boards and the window got installed. As I mentioned, we did use a window company to install this window. It was just to take some of the load off of Stephen's back. We've done window installs before, but the installation cost isn't really that high. If you want to save some money, certainly install the windows yourself, but if you have a little bit extra playing room, it's a good way to save a lot of time and a lot of energy. In order to ensure ensure a snug fit for the window, they added some extra wood as well and some shims, which is pretty standard practice with window installation. And then they did a white wood frame around 3 sides of the window. We asked them to leave the bottom because we were putting in a special base, which you'll see later. And then we added some spray foam around that framing to ensure there were no air gaps. Next, we installed some vapor barrier and some taping around the framing and the insulation, again to reduce the amount of vapor and air that can seep through. We did the same thing on the outside of the window, which meant we had this exposed vapor barrier on the outside exposed to the element. It is under an overhang, but if we didn't cover it up, it wouldn't last that long in that state. So let's switch back over to our window diagram. And then we're going to flip it because the framing is flipped because we're now on the outside of the house. So what we did was built a box around that insulation area and then put a little bit of a ledge on top of that. This was a great solution. It looked wonderful and it could be a permanent solution with regular painting maintenance, but we had a different thing in mind, which we'll talk about near the end of the video. Now that the window's in and the outside is protected, it's time to finish the final touches on the window. Now, how you proceed from here may be very different than how we're going to proceed. If you have drywall throughout your space, you're going to continue by filling that bottom space with drywall. However, although we have drywall in the upper 2/3 of our walls in the kitchen, the lower third is wainscoting. The original wainscoting is a little bit unique, as in that we haven't found it anywhere when we've looked. It has, instead of an empty groove, it has sort of a beading inside of it. And the previous owners have replaced that in different areas with a V-grooved wainscoting, which is pretty camouflage. You can't really see that it's different unless you're looking for it. So that's what we've used here to fill this gap. But before we actually get to installing the wainscoting, there's a few steps that we need to do first. So what we did is we came back to the space and measured it out in order to cut a piece of plywood to fit that exposed area, covering up the vapor barrier sealed insulation. As you can see, Stephen first put in shims against the vapor barrier. This was to ensure that the plywood came out at just the right distance from the studs so that the new wainscoting would line up with the old wainscoting. And then we screwed that into the studs. Next, we had to work on replicating this ledge here that you find with all our windows throughout the house. So to do this, we bought a piece of 2x8 pine wood, and then we cut that down to size. To determine the length that we needed the plank of wood to be, we measured where one edge of the trim would start to where the other edge would end, which you may be better able to visualize in this photo. And to determine the width that we needed the plank of wood to be, we measured a previous windowsill, measuring all the way from the tip of the ledge all the way to the edge of the window. Next, Stephen created a stencil based on the other ledges in the house, and we used that as a guide to make sure that we were shaping the wood in the same way as the other ledges. To begin to shape the wood, we were using a router, as you see Stephen doing here, using a 3/8 inch roundover bit. After using the router, we actually needed to do quite a lot of sanding in order to match that same rounded edge that's found in the other ledges throughout the house. Every so often throughout this process, we'd stop and check the shape against the template, and then we would continue on with the sanding. We continued on with this process until we were happy with the final shape. For the next step, we need to notch out the corners of the wood in order for the ledge to slide into the window and fit around the wall. You can see those notches marked out in pencil here, but let's go into that into a bit more detail. So first, you are going to find the length of the first line by measuring from the window to the outermost edge of the inner trim, or studs, or the wall, whichever of those three comes out further. For the length of the next measurement, you're going to measure from the edge of the inner trim to the very edge of the outer trim, or the trim that fits around the window onto the wall in the second arrow you see here. And then these two measurements together are going to give you that overall measurement that you need in order to notch out the corner of the wood to fit up against the window and around the corner of the wall. Next, repeat those same steps and measurements on the other side of the window and mark them down on the other side of the plank of wood. The next thing that we did that you can see here is we sanded down the surface area of the plank to smooth out all the wood grain. This just helps give the overall sill a very finished, polished look. With our wood nicely sanded, we're now going to use a table saw to cut out those notches that we just outlined. Using a pocket hole jig, Stephen is drilling 2 holes on an angle through the plank of wood. The angled holes allow you to both easily hide the screws, but also allow for a more structurally sound attachment. Now with the sill all prepped, it's time to attach it to the wall. When attaching your windowsill, first place it in place and check that it's level. If not, make adjustments as needed by placing shims underneath. Once you feel it's level, secure it in place using screws, at least 2, to secure it into the studs, and then check again that it's level. With the sill in place, you can now measure the distance from the bottom of the sill to the floor in order to make your cuts for the pieces of wainscoting that are going to go underneath. With your pieces of wainscoting cut, it's a good idea to do a dry fit test before you nail them in. That's what Stephen's doing here. The reason for this is floors are often not level, especially in these older homes like we live in. So one piece is not necessarily going to fit in the same spot as another piece. Once you figured out where they fit best, then lay them out down on the floor somewhere so that you know where each goes as you're nailing them in. Again, you can see Stephen using a shim to make sure that the piece of wainscoting matches up with the old wainscoting. And then he's using an air nailer both to put the shim in place and then to affix each piece of wainscoting into the wall. Next on the to-do list is to measure all the trim before cutting. So now you need to measure from the very top of the opening of the drywall to the top of the sill. And this is a lengthy and a little bit tricky process because, as you'll see, this big fancy trim is composed of many different pieces. Much of the new trim isn't like that. Some might be 1 or 2 pieces, but this is many pieces fitting together. They all tend to have different lengths and are cut in different places. So don't be afraid to get out a piece of paper and a pencil and make some calculations and put those math skills to work. One other detail you may have noticed is that we actually remove the paint from the trim as well. This isn't necessary, just an optional step. Even before we put the finishing touches in, this window was a hit with our kids. From one learning to pull the stand for the first time, to another one just enjoying gazing at the window, and to even some window visits. The next step in the process was filling all the holes in the trim and evening out the surfaces, and you can see here there were quite a few holes in this old trim. So we used a wood filler, and in this case it came in a squeeze bottle, which was quite convenient. I usually use a drywall putty knife to apply filler like this, but sometimes on rounded surfaces like this it is much better to use my finger. I do, however, recommend that you use gloves to protect both your skin and your health. After letting the filler dry, you want to sand the surface and repeat filling the holes as much as possible until you have a nice even surface. After all of that has been filled and sanded, it's time to paint. Even though painting is arguably one of the more simpler renovation projects you can do, it makes such an impact as you see here. So after everything was painted, later on we did hire a masonry company who filled in the bricks in the bottom and put in an outdoor sill for us that really helped finish that off outdoors. And it looks very similar to the other windows in our house. And for a relatively small project, this really paid off in functionality, efficiency, and overall aesthetics of our house. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you learned a little bit from this video and are inspired to make some changes in your home. And if you can think of anybody that would enjoy this video as well, please be sure to share our video. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more videos like this. So here's that bee footage that I was telling you about. These videos and photos really don't do it justice. At the beginning, there were so many bees when we came back to the house, swarming mostly around the different entrances to the house and really around this boarded up door. So I thought for sure we were gonna have a swarm inside the house. Fortunately, my cousin was here visiting, who is a member of a beekeeper family and so knowledgeable. He helped remind us that bees are really docile, and although swarming is a scary word, really it just means that the bees are looking for a new house and they're just really curious at this point in time. So that really helped calm us, and just like he said, no one got stung, no one was hurt. There were a lot, I think over 100 bees in the house that we had to help get out, as you see Stephen doing in these videos. But other than that, everything was great, and it was quite a memory, quite an experience to witness these swarming bees. So I hope you enjoyed these videos and have a little bit more of an appreciation for bees now. Bye!